They told her she was nothing but a burden, a poor relation destined to scrub floors and die alone. At 23, Eleanor Vance had accepted her fate. On the night of the Grand Winter Ball of 1882, she didn't go to find a husband. She went to say goodbye to a life she was never allowed to live. She stood in the shadows, invisible to everyone, until the most dangerous man in England walked across the floor. He didn't just offer her a dance, he offered her a weapon. But neither of them knew that this single kiss on her hand would trigger a scandal that would burn their enemies to the ground. The date was November 14th, 1882. The location was the sprawling, frost-covered estate of Lord Harrington in the English countryside. For most of the guests arriving in their gilded carriages, the winter ball was the highlight of the social season. For Eleanor Vance, it was a funeral for her freedom. Eleanor sat before a cracked vanity mirror in the smallest, coldest room of the Harrington Manor. She wasn't a guest here, not truly. She was the poor relation, the orphaned niece of the wealthy and cruel Aunt Bailey Harrington. For 10 years, since her parents died in a carriage accident, Eleanor had served as an unpaid servant, suffering in silence while her cousin, the vain and spiteful Genevieve, lived like a princess. "Are you still staring at yourself?" The voice cut through the cold air like a whip. Eleanor didn't turn around. She knew exactly who stood in the doorway. Aunt Bailey swept into the room, her purple silk dress rustling aggressively. "I am almost ready, Aunt Bailey," Eleanor said, her voice steady but quiet. "Ready?" Bailey scoffed, looking at Eleanor's reflection with undisguised disdain. "You look like a ghost wrapped in rags. That dress was out of fashion 5 years ago." "Honestly, Eleanor, I don't know why you insisted on attending tonight. It's not as if anyone will look at you." Eleanor smoothed the fabric of her gown. It was a pale, icy blue, her mother's old dress, which Eleanor had spent 3 nights secretly altering by candlelight, pricking her fingers until they bled to add lace from a discarded petticoat. It wasn't opulent, but it was elegant. "It is my last night here, Aunt," Eleanor replied, finally turning to face the older woman. "I simply wish to see the ballroom one last time before tomorrow." Bailey smiled, a cold, thin expression that never reached her eyes. "Ah, yes, tomorrow. The train to Yorkshire leaves at 6 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Higgins writes that her 7 children are quite unruly, and the coal dust in the village is dreadful. But it's fitting work for someone with no dowry and no prospects. You should be grateful I found you a position as a governess at all." "I am grateful," Eleanor lied. She felt a lump form in her throat. The position in Yorkshire wasn't a job. It was exile. It was a life of servitude in a grim industrial town, far away from society, art, or beauty. "Good," Bailey snapped. "Stay out of the way tonight. Genevieve is determined to secure a proposal from the Viscount of Oakhaven. Do not embarrass us. If you spill a drink or trip over your own feet, I will send you to Yorkshire without even a winter coat." With a final glare, Bailey left. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window. Below, the carriages were lining up. She took a deep breath. She had made a promise to herself. She would not cry. She would not cower. Tonight, for just a few hours, she would pretend she was not the unwanted orphan. She would pretend she was a lady of value. She put on her only piece of jewelry, a small silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her parents, and stepped out into the hallway. The ballroom was a sea of light. 3 massive crystal chandeliers suspended from the ceiling cast a golden glow over hundreds of swirling dancers. The air smelled of expensive perfume, beeswax, and champagne. The sound of the string quartet was overwhelming. Eleanor moved instinctively to the perimeter of the room, finding a spot behind a large potted fern. This was her place. The edge. The shadow. She watched as Genevieve, resplendent in a crimson gown imported from Paris, laughed loudly in the center of the room, surrounded by suitors. Genevieve was beautiful, yes, but her beauty was sharp, like a diamond that cut anyone who got too close. "Look at her," a voice whispered nearby. Eleanor stiffened, realizing 2 elderly dowagers were standing on the other side of the fern, unaware of her presence. "That's the Harrington girl, Genevieve." "Vicious creature," the first woman murmured. I heard she fired her maid last week for brushing her hair too hard. And who is that pale thing in the corner? The one in the blue dress? The second woman asked. Eleanor held her breath. Oh, that's just the cousin. Eleanor, I think. A charity case. Bailey keeps her around to mend the linens. She's leaving tomorrow, I hear. Off to be a servant in the north. Poor thing. She has the look of a tragedy about her. The look of a tragedy. Eleanor closed her eyes. It was true. She was a tragedy. She turned to leave, her resolve breaking. She couldn't do this. It was better to go back to her cold room and pack her trunk than to stand here and listen to her own obituary. But just as she turned toward the doors, the music stopped. A hush fell over the room. It wasn't the polite silence of a song ending. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of fear and awe. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The major domo struck his staff against the floor, his voice trembling slightly, announcing His Grace, Salvatore Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the gossiping dowagers behind the fern fell silent. Eleanor froze. She knew the name. Everyone in England knew the name Salvatore Thorne. He was the Wolf of Blackwood. Rumors clung to him like smoke. They said he was richer than the Queen, but cursed. They said his first wife had vanished under mysterious circumstances. They said he had a temper that could shatter glass and a heart made of granite. He had not been seen at a social gathering in London for 3 years. Why was he here? Salvatore Thorne walked into the room. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and imposing in a suit of severe black velvet. He wore no decorations, no medals, only the stark authority of his presence. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome, but marred by a jagged scar running along his jawline, a souvenir, it was said, from a duel in Italy. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the room with bored indifference. He looked like a predator deciding which sheep to eat, or perhaps deciding that none of them were worth the effort. Lord Harrington, Eleanor's uncle, rushed forward, sweating profusely. "Your Grace! We did not expect you. What an honor!" Salvatore didn't smile. "My carriage threw a wheel a mile down the road. I require assistance with the repair. I suppose I must endure your hospitality while I wait." His voice was deep, resonant, and dripping with disdain. Of course, Lord Harrington stammered. "Please, enjoy the ball. My daughter, Genevieve." He gestured wildly. Genevieve, sensing the biggest prize in the kingdom had just walked in, immediately pushed her way to the front. She fanned herself aggressively, batting her eyelashes. "Your Grace!" Genevieve purred, dropping into a low curtsy that displayed a scandalous amount of cleavage. "I am Lady Genevieve. It would be my honor to fetch you a glass of wine." Salvatore looked down at her. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her as one might look at a stain on a rug. "I prefer to fetch my own wine," he said coldly, stepping around her as if she were a piece of furniture. A ripple of shock went through the room. Genevieve's face turned a violent shade of red. She had been publicly snubbed. Eleanor, watching from the shadows, felt a strange, forbidden spark of satisfaction. Salvatore moved through the crowd, the sea of people parting for him. He took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and drained it in one swallow. He looked utterly miserable, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. Then he stopped. His gaze, sharp and predatory, cut across the ballroom. It bypassed the jewels, the feathers, and the desperate mothers pushing their daughters forward. It landed directly on the potted fern in the corner. It landed on Eleanor. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to shrink into the wall, to disappear. She was the poor relation, the girl in the mended dress. Men like the Duke of Blackwood did not look at girls like her. But he didn't look away. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. Slowly, deliberately, he began to walk toward her. The crowd watched in confusion. Why was the Duke walking toward the servants' entrance? Was he leaving? He stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close, he was terrifying. He smelled of rain, leather, and expensive tobacco. The scar on his jaw twitched slightly. "You," he said. Eleanor curtsied, her knees shaking. "Your Grace, you are not dancing," he stated. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "No, Your Grace," Eleanor whispered, keeping her eyes on the floor. "Look at me." The command was soft, but absolute. Eleanor forced her chin up. She met his gaze. For a moment, the sounds of the ballroom faded away. She saw something in his gray eyes that shocked her. It wasn't cruelty, it was exhaustion. And perhaps loneliness? Why does the only person in this room with any dignity hide behind a plant? Salvatore asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Eleanor blinked. I do not belong here, Your Grace. I am leaving tomorrow." "Leaving?" "To Yorkshire, to be a governess." Salvatore studied her face. He looked at the mended lace on her neckline, the simple silver locket, and the way her hands were clenched at her sides to stop them from trembling. He looked at Genevieve, who was glaring daggers from across the room, and then back at Eleanor. A strange, dark smile touched his lips. It transformed his face from frightening to mesmerizing. "Yorkshire is cold this time of year," he said, "and I find this party insufferable. I require a diversion." He extended his hand. It was a large hand, gloved in white kidskin. "Dance with me." The room gasped audibly. "Your Grace!" Eleanor stammered, panic rising in her chest. "I cannot. I am nobody. My aunt would be furious. I am not suitable company for a duke." "I decide who is suitable," Salvatore growled. "And I am tired of peacocks like your cousin. I wish to dance with the woman who had the good sense to hide from them." He didn't wait for her to accept. He took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and electric. He pulled her out from the shadows and led her onto the center of the floor. "Play a waltz," Salvatore barked at the orchestra. The musicians, terrified, immediately struck up a Strauss waltz. Salvatore placed a hand on Eleanor's waist. The touch burned through the thin fabric of her dress. As they began to move, Eleanor realized 2 things. First, he was an impeccable dancer, moving with a grace that belied his size. Second, every single person in the room, including Aunt Bailey and Genevieve, was watching them with open mouths. For the first time in 10 years, Eleanor was not invisible. She was the center of the universe. "What is your name?" Salvatore asked as he spun her around, her blue dress flaring out. "Eleanor," she breathed. "Eleanor Vance." "Eleanor," he repeated, testing the weight of it. "A queen's name." "I am no queen, Your Grace. I am a pauper." "Tonight," Salvatore said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You are the only woman in this room who matters. Let them stare, Eleanor. Let them burn with envy. Give them a show." And so she did. For 5 glorious minutes, Eleanor Vance floated. She forgot about the coal dust in Yorkshire. She forgot about her aunt's cruelty. She held on to the Wolf of Blackwood, and he held on to her as if she were made of porcelain. When the music ended, he didn't let go immediately. He held her hand, raised it to his lips, and pressed a lingering kiss to her knuckles. His eyes never left hers. "Do not go to Yorkshire, Miss Vance," he whispered against her skin. Then he turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the center of the floor, while 100 pairs of eyes bored into her back like knives. The silence that followed was heavy, but Eleanor knew one thing. The war had just begun. The magic of the waltz did not survive the sunrise. Eleanor woke not to the memory of the Duke's warm hand, but to the stinging impact of a cold, hard slap across her face. She gasped, recoiling on her narrow cot. Aunt Bailey stood over her, her face a mask of purple fury, still wearing her dressing gown. Behind her, Genevieve leaned against the doorframe, sobbing into a lace handkerchief, though Eleanor noted her eyes were dry and venomous. "You ungrateful, wretched little snake," Bailey screamed, her voice shaking the thin walls of the attic room. "Aunt Bailey," Eleanor cried, clutching her cheek. "I did nothing." "He asked me. He asked you because you bewitched him," Bailey shrieked. "You humiliated your cousin. Genevieve is the beauty of this county. She was the one destined for the Duke's attention. And you shadow, you charity case, you dared to flaunt yourself in front of the entire peerage." "Everyone is talking about it, Mother," Genevieve wailed theatrically. "They are laughing at me. They say the Duke preferred the maid over the mistress. I can never show my face in society again." Bailey grabbed a handful of Eleanor's hair, yanking her head back. "You will not go to Yorkshire." For a split second, Eleanor felt a surge of hope. "Yorkshire is too good for you," Bailey hissed, leaning close. "I have spoken to the vicar. There is a sanatorium in Cornwall for hysterical women. Women who have lost their minds and imagine themselves duchesses. The carriage will be here in an hour. You will go there, and you will never be heard from again." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The sanatoriums were notoriously brutal, prisons where unwanted women were drugged and forgotten. "You cannot do that. I am of sound mind." "Who will believe you?" Bailey sneered, letting go of her hair. "You are a penniless orphan. I am Lady Harrington. Get dressed. Pack nothing. You won't need clothes where you are going." Bailey stormed out, slamming the door. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed like a gunshot. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. This was it. The end of her life. She looked at the small silver locket on the nightstand, her only possession. She clutched it to her chest, tears finally spilling over. The Duke's kiss on her hand felt like a dream from 1,000 years ago. He had called her a queen, but in the light of day, she was just a prisoner. 30 minutes later, the sound of wheels on gravel crunched below. Eleanor stood up, wiping her face. If she was going to be dragged away, she would not go weeping. She would walk out with her head high, just as Salvatore had commanded her to do on the dance floor. She heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. The door unlocked, but it wasn't the vicar's man who stood there. It was the Harrington butler, looking pale and terrified. "Miss Eleanor," he stammered. "You are summoned downstairs." "Is the carriage here?" Eleanor asked dully. "A carriage is here, miss. But you must come." Eleanor walked down the grand staircase. In the foyer, a scene of absolute chaos was unfolding. Aunt Bailey was standing by the fireplace, her face the color of ash. Lord Harrington was wringing his hands. Genevieve was staring open-mouthed. Standing in the center of the hall, looking entirely out of place amidst the floral wallpaper, was a man in a livery of black and silver. He was tall, severe, and held a silver-tipped cane. He was not a servant of the Harringtons. "Miss Eleanor Vance?" the man asked. His voice was clipped and precise. "I am she," Eleanor said, descending the last step. The man bowed. A respectful, deep bow that one would offer a lady of rank, not a poor relation. "I am Mr. Sterling. I serve His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood." Bailey found her voice. "This is a mistake. The girl is ill. She is being sent away for her own health immediately. She cannot receive visitors." Mr. Sterling turned his head slowly to look at Bailey. He didn't speak to her. He merely looked at her until she flinched. He turned back to Eleanor. "His Grace has sent me with a proposition, Miss Vance. He understands that your current situation is precarious. He is in need of a cataloger for the Blackwood Ancestral Library. It is a massive undertaking, requiring intelligence, discretion, and a knowledge of history. He believes you possess all three." "A librarian," Genevieve scoffed. "She's a servant. The position comes with a salary of £200 a year," Mr. Sterling continued, ignoring Genevieve completely. "And private lodgings at Blackwood Manor. £200. It was a fortune. It was independence. "I accept," Eleanor said quickly. "You will do no such thing." Bailey stepped forward, her eyes wild. "She is my ward. She does not have permission to leave." Mr. Sterling reached into his coat and pulled out a rolled parchment sealed with red wax. "This is an order of transfer, signed by the magistrate this morning. His Grace, the Duke, has petitioned the court to become Miss Vance's legal sponsor, citing familial neglect. Unless you wish to debate the definition of neglect with the Duke's barristers in open court, Lady Harrington, I suggest you step aside." The threat was clear. Salvatore Thorne had not just offered her a job, he had declared war on her family. Bailey opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew the power of the Blackwood name. One word from the Duke could ruin the Harringtons financially and socially. "Fine," Bailey spat. "Take her. But mark my words, Mr. Sterling, that girl brings bad luck. She will be the ruin of him." "I have the carriage waiting, Miss Vance," Sterling said, offering his arm. "Do you have any belongings?" Eleanor looked at the grand house that had been her prison for 10 years. She looked at her aunt, hateful and small in defeat. "I have everything I need," Eleanor said, clutching her locket. She walked out the front door, the cold winter air hitting her face. A black carriage with the crest of a wolf waited. As she stepped inside, sinking into the velvet seats, she realized she was shaking. She had escaped the frying pan, but as the carriage lurched forward, heading toward the dark forests of Blackwood, she wondered if she had just jumped into the fire. The journey took 4 hours. As they traveled further from London, the countryside changed. The polite, manicured hedgerows gave way to dense, ancient forests. The sky seemed to darken, heavy with gray clouds that obscured the sun. Blackwood Manor was not a house, it was a fortress. It stood on a cliff overlooking a churning gray sea. The architecture was Gothic, a sprawling mass of dark stone, turreted towers, and high, arched windows that looked like unblinking eyes. It was magnificent, but terrifying. The carriage pulled into a courtyard paved with cobblestones. Mr. Sterling opened the door. "Welcome to Blackwood, Miss Vance!" Eleanor stepped out. The wind here was fierce, smelling of salt and pine. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. "His Grace is waiting for you in the study," Sterling said, leading her through the massive oak double doors. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior. The entrance hall was cavernous, lit by flickering gas lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. Suits of armor lined the walls. It was silent. No sound of laughter, no servants bustling about. It felt like a house holding its breath. Sterling led her down a long corridor and opened a heavy mahogany door. "Miss Vance, Your Grace." Salvatore Thorne was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. He had discarded the formal velvet suit of the ball. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms and a dark waistcoat. He looked less like a duke and more like a warrior at rest. He turned. The scar on his jaw seemed more prominent in the firelight. "You came," he said softly. "You gave me little choice," Eleanor replied, finding her courage. "Your man practically kidnapped me from my aunt's clutches." "I saved you," Salvatore corrected, walking toward her. "There is a difference." He stopped a few feet away. The air between them crackled with the same electricity as the night before, but there was something else now, a heaviness. "Why?" Eleanor asked. "Why go to such lengths for a poor relation you met for 5 minutes? Is there really a library to be catalogued?" "There is," Salvatore said, "and you will catalog it. But that is not the only reason you are here." He poured 2 glasses of sherry and handed one to her. Eleanor took it, her fingers brushing his. "My life is complicated, Eleanor," he said, taking a sip. "I am surrounded by people who wish to see me fail, people who want my title, my land, and my money. They expect me to marry a woman like your cousin, someone vapid, controllable, someone who plays their game. He began to pace. I needed to disrupt the board. By dancing with you, I signaled that I will not play by their rules. By bringing you here, I have confused them. They are wondering who you are. Are you my mistress? My secret fiancée? My spy? Eleanor felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. And what am I, your grace? Salvatore stopped and looked at her. His eyes were unguarded for the first time. You are the first person in 10 years who looked at me and didn't see a bag of gold or a title. You looked at me and saw a man. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I brought you here because I need an ally, Eleanor. Someone who owes nothing to society. Someone who knows what it is to be an outsider. I am just a girl with a mended dress, Eleanor whispered. No, Salvatore said fiercely. You are a survivor. I saw it in your eyes. And I need a survivor. Because there is something rot in this house, Eleanor. Someone is trying to kill me. Eleanor dropped her glass. It shattered on the hearthrug, the sherry staining the wool like blood. Kill you? She gasped. 3 accidents in the last month, Salvatore said calmly, ignoring the broken glass. A saddle strap cut, a loose stone on the balcony, poison in my wine decanter. He reached out and took her hands. I cannot trust my staff. I cannot trust my relatives. I saw you at the ball, how you observed everything, how you stayed in the shadows. I need your eyes, Eleanor. I need you to be my librarian, yes, but I also need you to watch, to listen, to help me find the snake in the grass before it strikes again. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't a romance. It was a conspiracy. He hadn't saved her. He had drafted her. And if I refuse, she asked, then I will give you £500 and a ticket to America, Salvatore said. You can leave tonight. I will not force you to stay in a house of death. Eleanor looked at his hands holding hers. They were strong, calloused hands. She looked at his face. The loneliness she had sensed at the ball was now explained. He was powerful, yes, but he was hunted. She thought of Aunt Bailey. She thought of the cold room in Yorkshire. She thought of a life of nothingness. Here, there was danger. But here, she was needed. I do not know how to catch a killer, Your Grace, Eleanor said steadily, but I have spent 10 years being invisible. I know how to watch. Salvatore exhaled, a sound of immense relief. He squeezed her hands. Thank you, Eleanor, but there is one rule. One absolute rule you must follow while you are under my roof. What is it? His expression hardened. The wolf returned. The east wing. The tower at the end of the gallery. You must never go there. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, the door is locked for a reason. What is in the east wing? Eleanor asked, a chill running down her spine. The past, Salvatore said darkly. And the past is dangerous. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor settled into a rhythm at Blackwood Manor. By day, she worked in the library, a magnificent 2-story room filled with dust and rare manuscripts. It was a scholar's paradise, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor felt useful. She organized, she cataloged, and she cleaned. But she also watched. She watched Mrs. Graves, the housekeeper, who moved silently and always seemed to be listening at doors. She watched the stablemaster, who had a shifty gaze and argued in hushed tones with strangers at the gate. And she watched Salvatore. They dined together every evening. It was scandalous. The Duke and his librarian alone at a table set for 20, but Salvatore didn't care. Over roast duck and wine they talked. Not about society gossip, but about books, philosophy, and art. Eleanor discovered that beneath his gruff exterior, Salvatore was a man of deep intellect and dry wit. He made her laugh, and when she smiled, she caught him staring at her with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. But the shadow of the assassin hung over them. Eleanor tasted his wine before he drank it, at her own insistence, despite his protests. She checked the floorboards. She became his shield. However, the mystery of the East Wing gnawed at her. At night, when the wind howled around the stone towers, Eleanor sometimes heard sounds. Soft, melodic sounds. Like a piano, playing a sad, broken tune. It always came from the direction of the locked tower. One rainy Tuesday, Salvatore left for London on urgent business regarding his estate. "I will be back in 2 days," he told her, his hand lingering on her shoulder. "Stay safe, Eleanor. Trust no one." That night, a storm battered the coast. Thunder shook the foundations of the manor. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat by her fire, reading, when she heard it again. The piano. It was louder tonight. Desperate. Eleanor grabbed her candle. She knew the rule. Never go to the East Wing. But the music was hypnotic. It sounded like a cry for help. She stepped into the hallway. The house was dark. She moved silently, her bare feet making no sound on the runner rugs. She passed the gallery of ancestors, their painted eyes watching her. She reached the heavy oak door of the East Wing. It was supposed to be locked. The handle turned in her hand. It was open. Eleanor's heart pounded in her throat. "Trap!" her mind screamed. "It's a trap!" But she pushed the door open. A spiral stone staircase wound upwards. The music was coming from the top. Eleanor ascended, shielding her candle flame from the draught. At the top of the stairs was a small circular room. It was not a dungeon. It was a nursery. There was a rocking horse in the corner, a crib covered in dust, and in the center of the room, sitting at a small, dusty, upright piano, was not a ghost. It was a painting. A life-sized portrait sat on an easel, illuminated by the lightning flashing through the window. It depicted a woman of breathtaking beauty, hair like spun gold, eyes of violet. She wore the Blackwood diamonds, but the canvas had been slashed. Violent, angry tears ripped through the blash. Painted face. On the floor beneath the painting sat a music box. It was open, playing the sad, broken tune Eleanor had heard. "Who opened this?" Eleanor whispered to herself. "I did." Eleanor spun around. Standing in the shadows of the doorway was not Salvatore. It was a woman Eleanor had never seen before. She was older, dressed in mourning black, with a face that looked eerily familiar. "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded, holding her candle up like a weapon. "I am the one who should be mistress of this house," the woman hissed. She stepped into the light. Eleanor gasped. It was Salvatore's aunt, the sister of his late father, Lady Agatha. "He told you not to come here," Agatha said, a cruel smile twisting her lips. She held a heavy brass candlestick in her hand. "He told you to stay away, but you little rats are always so curious." You are the one," Eleanor realized, her mind racing. "You are the one trying to kill him." "Kill him?" Agatha laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "I am trying to save the line. Salvatore is cursed. He killed his wife. Do you see her?" She pointed to the slashed painting with the candlestick. "That was Isabella, his first duchess. She died in this room. He threw her out of that window." "That's a lie," Eleanor said, though her voice shook. "Salvatore is a good man." "He is a monster!" Agatha screamed. "And now he has brought you here, another peasant girl to pollute the bloodline. I put the poison in the wine. I loosened the stone. But he has the devil's own luck." Agatha took a step forward, raising the heavy brass candlestick. "But you do not have his luck. If I cannot kill the wolf, I will kill his pet. And when he returns and finds you dead in the room of his murdered wife, he will finally go mad. They will lock him away, and Blackwood will be mine." Eleanor backed away, hitting the wall. She was trapped. A storm outside, a madwoman inside, and Salvatore miles away in London. Agatha lunged. The heavy brass candlestick sliced through the air, missing Eleanor's head by inches. It smashed into the plaster wall, sending a cloud of white dust into the dark room. Eleanor didn't scream. Panic had been replaced by a cold, sharp instinct for survival. As Lady Agatha raised the weapon for a second strike, Eleanor grabbed the only thing within reach, the heavy oak music box on the floor. "You will not have him!" Agatha shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of pure madness. "I will not let a servant girl take what belongs to my blood." As Agatha lunged, Eleanor swung the music box with all her might. It collided with Agatha's shoulder with a sickening crack. The older woman cried out, dropping the candlestick and stumbling back against the easel. The portrait of the dead Duchess toppled over, covering Agatha in the slashed canvas of the woman she had tormented. Agatha fell to her knees, clutching her shoulder, hissing in pain. You wretched!" Eleanor scrambled back toward the door, her chest heaving. She reached for the handle, but before she could turn it, the door exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew across the room. A dark figure filled the frame, silhouetted by the lightning flashing in the hallway windows. It was Salvatore. He was drenched, his coat dripping water onto the stone floor, his chest rising and falling as if he had run 10 miles. In his hand, he held a revolver. "Salvatore!" Eleanor gasped, her knees finally giving way. Salvatore's eyes scanned the room instantly. The shattered plaster, the toppled painting, Eleanor trembling on the floor, and his Aunt Agatha moaning amidst the wreckage. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. He holstered the gun and walked over to Eleanor first. He knelt, his large hands framing her face, checking her for injuries. His touch was gentle, trembling slightly. "Did she hurt you?" he demanded, his voice rough. "No," Eleanor whispered. "But she said." Salvatore stood up and turned to his aunt. Agatha looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and malice. "You were supposed to be in London," Agatha spat. "I never went to London," Salvatore said coldly. "I knew the attacks were coming from inside the house, Agatha. I knew the accidents only happened when I was vulnerable. I told you I was leaving to draw the viper out of its nest. I just didn't expect the viper to be my own father's sister. I did it for the family." Agatha screamed, struggling to stand. "You are unfit. You are cursed. You drove Isabella to her grave." "Isabella was sick," Salvatore roared, his voice shaking the stone walls. "She had a sickness of the mind. And you made it worse." He turned to Eleanor, pain etched into his features. "Isabella wasn't murdered, Eleanor. She took her own life in this room. She suffered from a terrible melancholia. And for years, Agatha whispered in her ear. Told her I hated her. Told her she was barren, useless, unloved. Agatha drove her to that window." "I only told her the truth," Agatha cried. "You drove her to madness so you could control the estate," Salvatore countered. "And when she died, and I was broken by grief, you started the rumors. You told the village I pushed her. You isolated me so you could rule Blackwood through fear." He stepped closer to his aunt, towering over her. "I tolerated your presence because you were my blood. I thought you were just a bitter old woman. I didn't know you were a murderer. But tonight? Tonight you tried to harm the only light that has entered this house. In 3 years." Salvatore snapped his fingers. 2 burly groundskeepers appeared in the doorway behind him. "Take her," Salvatore ordered. "Lock her in the cellar until the constable arrives. She will face trial for attempted murder." "You can't do this!" Agatha shrieked as the men grabbed her arms. "I am a Harrington by blood. I am your aunt." "You are nothing to me," Salvatore said, turning his back on her. As Agatha's screams faded down the spiral staircase, silence returned to the tower room. The rain drummed against the roof. Salvatore looked at Eleanor. He looked broken, ashamed. "I am sorry," he rasped. "I brought you into a nightmare. I thought I could protect you. I failed." He turned to leave, unable to meet her eyes. "Salvatore." Eleanor stood up. She walked across the room, stepping over the broken debris of the past. She reached out and took his hand. He flinched, as if unworthy of her touch. "You didn't fail," she said firmly. "You came back." "I almost got you killed. You should leave, Eleanor. Take the money. Go to America. Find a man who doesn't have a house full of ghosts." Eleanor looked at the scar on his jaw, the gray eyes that had seen too much darkness. She thought of the way he had looked at her at the ball, like she was the only person in the world. She thought of the library, the quiet dinners, the man beneath the monster. "I am not afraid of ghosts, Your Grace," she whispered. "And I am certainly not afraid of you." She reached up and touched his scar. "You asked me once to help you find the rot in this house. We found it. It is gone now. Now it is just a house. And it needs a librarian." Salvatore looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and adoration. He grabbed her hand, kissing the palm, then the wrist, burying his face in her touch. "I do not want a librarian," he murmured against her skin. "I want you." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her, not the polite kiss of a duke, but the desperate, passionate kiss of a man who has finally found his breath. In the dusty tower, amidst the storm, the curse of Blackwood was finally broken. 6 months had passed since the storm in the tower. The calendar had turned to May 1883, and London was in full bloom. The air in Mayfair smelled of rain-washed cobblestones and expensive French perfume, but for Lady Bailey Harrington, the air smelled only of desperation. The invitation to the Blackwood Spring Gala had arrived 2 weeks ago. Printed on heavy cream cardstock embossed with silver leaf, it was the most coveted object in all of England. For months, the newspapers had been in a frenzy. The reclusive Duke of Blackwood, the Wolf, had returned to society. More shockingly, he had married. Rumors regarding the new Duchess were wild and contradictory. Some claimed she was a Romanov princess fleeing political strife. Others whispered she was an American industrialist's daughter with a dowry of millions. No one had seen her face. Tonight was the unveiling. Bailey stood in the foyer of the newly renovated Blackwood townhouse, clutching her fan so tightly the whalebone ribs threatened to snap. Beside her, Genevieve looked less like a debutante and more like a wilting flower. "Stand up straight," Bailey hissed, pinching her daughter's arm. "And pinch your cheeks. You look like a corpse." "I am tired, Mother," Genevieve whined, her voice thin. "And this dress itches. Everyone knows it's dyed. We look like beggars." "Be quiet," Bailey snapped, her eyes darting around the room to see if anyone had heard. "This is our last chance, you foolish girl. Your father's investments in the copper mines have turned to dust. The creditors are circling like vultures. If you do not secure a match tonight, or at least an introduction to a wealthy peer, we lose everything. We lose the manor. We lose the servants. We lose our lives." Genevieve swallowed hard, terror finally overriding her petulance. They were standing on the precipice of ruin. They weren't here to celebrate. They were here to hunt for survival. The ballroom was a masterpiece of intimidation. Salvatore had spared no expense. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the balconies, and the chandeliers were so massive they seemed to threaten the floor below. The elite of London society were packed shoulder to shoulder, dukes, earls, viscounts, all waiting for the wolf and his mystery bride. Bailey smoothed the front of her gown. She had pawned her emerald necklace to pay for the carriage rental. She wore a necklace of paste glass, hoping the candlelight would hide the fraud. "Just remember," she whispered to Genevieve, "we are Harringtons. We are better than these people. Confidence is everything." Suddenly, the heavy velvet curtains at the top of the grand staircase swept open. The orchestra fell silent. The chatter of 500 guests died instantly. The majordomo, a man with a voice like a cannon, stepped forward and slammed his staff against the marble floor 3 times. The sound echoed like a judgment. "Presenting His Grace, Salvatore Thorne, the Duke of Blackwood." Salvatore stepped into the light. The change in him was absolute. Gone was the hunched, brooding figure who had skulked in the shadows of the winter ball. He stood tall, his broad shoulders encased in a coat of midnight blue velvet. The scar on his jaw was still there, but he wore it now not as a disfigurement, but as a badge of war. He looked powerful, dangerous, and utterly in command. He paused, looking down at the sea of faces with a cool, imperious gaze. Then he turned slightly and extended his hand toward the curtains. "And her? Grace!" the majordomo's voice boomed. "The Duchess of Blackwood." A collective intake of breath sucked the air out of the room. The woman who took Salvatore's hand was a vision that defied description. She wore a gown of gold silk embroidered with thousands of tiny pearls that caught the light with every movement. It was a dress worth more than the Harrington estate. Around her neck sat the Blackwood diamond, a stone the size of a robin's egg, legendary and priceless. Her hair was swept up in an intricate crown of curls woven with gold ribbon, but it was her face that stopped the hearts of the crowd. She was radiant. Her skin glowed with health, her eyes sparkled with intelligence and wit, and her smile was a weapon of mass destruction. She looked regal, she looked untouchable. Bailey Harrington squinted. Her eyesight was failing, and the distance was great. "Who is that?" she muttered. "She looks familiar." Genevieve, however, had younger eyes. Her mouth fell open, her face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. She began to shake, the dyed silk of her dress rustling. "Mother," Genevieve whispered, grabbing Bailey's arm. "Mother, no, it isn't possible. What is it? Is it a princess?" "It's Eleanor," Genevieve choked out. Bailey froze. "Don't be absurd. Eleanor is rotting in a sanatorium in Cornwall. Or scrubbing floors in Yorkshire. She is gone." "Look!" Genevieve shrieked, forgetting herself. "It's her!" As the couple began to descend the staircase, the truth hit Bailey like a physical blow. The tilt of the chin, the shape of the eyes. It was the poor relation. The charity case. The girl she had locked in an attic. The girl she had tried to throw away like garbage. But she wasn't a girl anymore, she was a duchess. And she was walking straight toward them. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing a confrontation. Salvatore led Eleanor through the throng, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. They didn't stop to greet the Prime Minister. They didn't stop for the Earl of Kent. They walked with terrifying purpose until they stood 3 feet from the trembling Harrington women. The silence in the immediate vicinity was deafening. Eleanor stopped. She opened her fan, a delicate thing made of ivory and lace, and looked at her aunt. There was no anger in her face. There was something far worse. Pity. "Aunt Bailey," Eleanor said. Her voice was different now, polished, smooth, lacking the tremor of fear that had defined her youth. "And Cousin Genevieve, I must say, I am surprised. I did not think you would accept the invitation." Bailey's mouth opened and closed, like a fish on dry land. She looked at the diamonds around Eleanor's neck, stones that could buy her freedom 10 times over. Her brain could not compute the reality. "Eleanor, this is a trick. You are a servant." "I was a servant in your house," Eleanor corrected softly. "Here, I am the mistress." Salvatore stepped forward. He loomed over Bailey, his shadow engulfing her. "Lady Harrington," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Bailey's chest. "My wife asked me to invite you. She has a very forgiving heart. She wished for you to see her happiness." We are happy for you," Bailey stammered, her survival instinct finally kicking in. She forced a grotesque, trembling smile. "We always knew you were special, Eleanor. Didn't we, Genevieve? We always said you were destined for great things. We are family, after all." Eleanor laughed. It was a light, musical sound, but it cut deep. "Family? You packed my trunk and tried to send me to a sanatorium because I dared to dance. You told me I was nothing. It was for your own good," Bailey cried, her voice rising in hysteria. "We were protecting you." "Enough," Salvatore barked. The word was sharp enough to cut glass. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. He held it out to Bailey. She took it with shaking hands. "What is this?" she whispered. "That," Salvatore said calmly, "is the deed to Harrington Manor, and the promissory notes for your husband's debts, and the outstanding bills to your dressmaker, your butcher, and your carriage rental service." Bailey looked up, horror dawning in her eyes. You paid them?" "I bought them," Salvatore corrected. "I own your debt, Bailey. I own your house. I own the chair you sit in, and the bed you sleep in." Genevieve let out a sob, clutching her mother. "And," Salvatore continued, his gray eyes flashing with cold fire, "I am calling in the debt. Immediately." "You can't," Bailey gasped. "We have nowhere to go. We are destitute." "Not entirely," Eleanor interjected gently. She stepped closer, her gold dress brushing against Genevieve's cheap silk. "I remembered, Aunt, that you had arranged a position for me. A governess role, was it not? In a mining village in Yorkshire, with a Mrs. Higgins and her 7 unruly children?" Bailey turned pale. "I took the liberty of contacting Mrs. Higgins," Eleanor said. "She was quite disappointed that I didn't arrive, but she is still in desperate need of help. Not a governess, I'm afraid. She couldn't afford one, but she needs a scullery maid. And a washerwoman." Eleanor smiled, a dazzling, terrifying smile. "I have arranged for your transport. The train leaves at 6 a.m. tomorrow. It is 3rd class, naturally. You wouldn't want to waste money." "You expect us to scrub floors?" Genevieve shrieked. "I am a lady." "So was I," Eleanor whispered. "And you made me a servant. Now, the wheel has turned. You will learn what it is to work, Genevieve. It will build character. I hear the coal dust is dreadful this time of year, but I'm sure you'll get used to it." Salvatore signaled to the footman. "Escort these women out. They have packing to do." "No, please, Eleanor, have mercy," Bailey screamed as the footman grabbed her arms. "We are your blood." "And that is the only reason you aren't in prison," Salvatore said icily. "Get them out of my sight." The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the Harringtons were dragged away, their wails echoing off the high ceilings until the heavy oak doors slammed shut, sealing their fate. The silence lingered for a moment. Then Salvatore turned to Eleanor. The coldness vanished from his face, replaced by a look of utter devotion. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing the same spot he had kissed that first night. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Eleanor looked at the closed doors. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying for 10 years. The ghost of the poor relation was gone. "Yes," she said, looking up into his eyes. "I believe I am finally free." Salvatore smiled. He turned to the orchestra and nodded. "Play the waltz." The music swelled, Strauss, triumphant and joyous. Salvatore swept his Duchess into his arms. As they spun across the floor, a blur of gold and blue, the crowd erupted into applause. But Eleanor didn't hear them. She only heard the beat of Salvatore's heart against hers. They had walked through fire, through storms, and through the darkness of the past to find each other. And as they danced in the center of the light, Eleanor Vance knew that this was not the end of her story. It was simply the beautiful beginning. And that is the incredible true story of Eleanor Vance, the unwanted orphan, who became a duchess. History tells us that Eleanor and Salvatore had 4 children and lived a long, devoted life at Blackwood Manor. Eleanor became a renowned philanthropist, using her fortune to build schools for orphan girls, ensuring no one else would ever be treated as, quote, nothing. As for Lady Bailey and Genevieve, they spent the rest of their days in that small cottage in Yorkshire, serving tea to coal miners to survive, a fitting end for those who valued status over kindness. It reminds us that true nobility isn't about blood or titles. It's about the courage to stand tall when the world wants you to be small. What would you have done if you were Eleanor, Would you have forgiven your family or served them the same karma? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please hit the like button. It helps the channel so much. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.